Hi everyone, my name is Neyha Pradeepkumar, and today I'll be presenting my project, Understanding the Origins of Astigmatism and the Science Behind the Blur, a literature review. So I'll be starting off with talking about what exactly is astigmatism, how mutations work, and the identified factors that I've researched for what actually causes astigmatism, those being genetic factors, environmental factors, age-related factors, and ultimately my conclusions on my research. So starting off, and to highlight how widespread astigmatism is, did you guys know that over 40% of young adults around the world have astigmatism to some degree? As someone with astigmatism myself, I was surprised and maybe a little relieved to learn that so many people share this condition. But it also emphasizes how much more research is needed to understand the origins of astigmatism and possible treatment options beyond what we already have. So first off, what exactly is astigmatism? So as you can see from the diagram over here, and from a scientific point of view, astigmatism occurs when light enters your eye and it does not hit a certain focal point in your retina. And that's due to the cornea. Every eyeball has a cornea, which is like a thin, transparent layer on top. And when it's deformed, light, when it's refracted through the eye, hits multiple different focal points in the retina. And this causes a quote unquote blurry and distorted image. So for a more visual representation of that, I have an image over here. And to the left, you can see this landscape that I have, and you can see how clear it is. This is what the view of someone who doesn't have astigmatism would look like. However, if you look at the right, you can see there are multiple differences in the image to the left with someone who doesn't have astigmatism, and the image to the right, the view of someone who does have astigmatism. So the three main implications when it comes to this view. The first one being the lack of depth perception. And an example of this would be like how the bench in the image to the right is much closer to you than the image to the left. And a better way to explain it is imagine you're going down the stairs, but you can't tell how deep the next step is. And that could be due to your astigmatism and how there's no depth perception there. Another implication could be the focal point not being defined. And since the light rays are refracted in multiple different areas and doesn't meet the specific focal point in your retina, you can tell that the image is having that blurry sensation. And what seems to be further could be closer than what you actually think. And finally, the third implication of having astigmatism could be the blurred image and how that affects color. As you can tell in the trees, on the left side image, it's more defined. You can tell which leaf is what color. However, on the image to the right, you can see different shades and how the colors of the leaves are not exactly defined. So this caused me to wonder what are actually the origins that cause astigmatism. And there are three main factors that I have identified. The first one being genetic mutations, specifically on the genes PDGFRA, sonic hedgehog, and BAX2, and FRAP1. Environmental factors and how perinatal photoperiods or being born in a summer month and environmental conditions at birth could affect the prevalence of astigmatism. And finally, age-related factors. And if age, just as growing old, is something that could affect astigmatism. So starting off with genetic aspects, I think it's important to highlight how a gene is actually mutated and its effect on an expression of the gene. So as we all know from our freshman year biology classes, a gene is just a structure that contains DNA and what codes for the proteins. And a mutation is a change in a DNA sequence. More specifically, an SNP, a single nucleotide polymorphism, is a small mutation where one nucleotide in the DNA is changed. If this mutation occurs in a protein coding gene, a mutation in the gene could lead to a change in the protein produced, which overall affects the function, because as we know, the shape of a protein will affect its overall function. And if this mutation occurs in a promoter region, it'll greatly affect how strongly this mutation is expressed. And I think it's important to note what a GWAS study is. It's a genome-wide association study in which there are multiple cohorts of people and an entire genome is analyzed to see if there's a significant mutation that leads to a specific condition. So starting off with the first gene that I researched, we have PDGFRA. And PDGFRA is a protein coding gene that's found on chromosome 4q12. And it is already established that mutations on PDGFRA can affect and cause cell development. It can cause gastrointestinal stromal tumors, which is a tumor in your gut, and more specifically relating to astigmatism, is corneal curvature. So connecting PDGFRA to astigmatism, PDGFRA mutations play a significant role in affecting corneal curvature. Now, if we go back to what the definition of astigmatism actually is, it's when the corneal curvature of your eye is a little bit irregular or misshaped. But it's important to note that irregular corneal curvature isn't always related to astigmatism. And since this link is not exactly defined, there's a wider scope for research here. However, two major GWAS studies that prove the link of PDGFRA and irregular corneal curvature would be an Asian population study and a European population study that found two SNPs on PDGFRA that were linked to abnormal corneal curvature, which I guess supports the fact that PDGFRA could be a significant affecting factor for corneal curvature. Moving on to the next gene, we have FRAP1, also commonly known as mTOR, and its effect on astigmatism. FRAP1's general function is to create cellular response, control protein synthesis, and cell growth. And in the same Asian population study that studied the effect of PDGFRA and corneal curvature, this FRAP1 gene also had an established link to abnormal corneal curvature. And what I found interesting is that FRAP1 contributes to the change in the metabolic pathway that helps develop epithelial tissue. And this epithelial tissue is a main factor for what causes corneal growth at birth. So the connection between FRAP1 and its effect on epithelial tissue could be another connecting point to how FRAP1 could be a cause for astigmatism. The third gene that I would like to talk about is SHH, which is also known as sonic hedgehog, and I think we can thank scientists for their incredible sense of humor. So sonic hedgehog is located on chromosome 7, and it's more related to the eye and is associated with eye patterning in embryonic development. And this also connects back to the regeneration of corneal epithelium, which is similar to FRAP1. And this can also develop a connection with age-related astigmatism. And that's something I found really interesting. So to explain, as we age, our cornea starts to regenerate, but this regeneration process slows down and the cornea can change its shape. And when sonic hedgehog has a mutation or a function that it slows down with age, it can cause corneal curvature to be less stable, which can ultimately cause an irregular corneal curvature structure to form, which could lead to astigmatism. And the last gene that I would like to talk about is FAX2, which is generally found in chromosome 2 in the promoter region 2p13. And VAX2's main function is a protein coding gene involved in the formation of the retina at birth. And another main function that it has is the development of the dorsal ventral axis during eye development, which is, if you look at an eyeball, it's the perpendicular meridians of the eyeball. And there were 7 studies that identified this thing called a susceptibility locus with the SNP on the chromosome 2p13. And this suggested a link between FAX2 and astigmatism. A susceptibility locus enhances an allele expression without exactly causing it. So when VAX2 is overexpressed, it can act as a transcription factor that affects the structures of the eye. So although VAX2 is not proved to cause corneal curvature being irregular or astigmatism, it could be something that enhances the effect of it. So moving on to environmental factors, there were 2 main studies that I researched in my literature review. The first one being a study in Israel that highlighted multiple environmental factors, and including the different prenatal environments that may affect corneal curvature. And a really big factor that this study found that I talked about earlier was how perinatal photoperiods, or the summer months as we would call it, are more likely to cause with the rule astigmatism, where the vertical meridian of your eye is much deeper. And why this occurs, they're not really sure, but this is a trend that they found in the study, in the GWAS study that was conducted. Another study called the Tehran Eye Study found that there was no link between genetics and astigmatism, which implied that astigmatism could be influenced more by environmental factors. Moving on to age-related factors, a study that was researched suggested that aging can lead to a shift in the axis of the eye. So as I mentioned earlier of with the rule astigmatism, it's when the meridians of your eyes are slightly shifted, and this can happen with against the rule astigmatism as well. And the trend of increased astigmatism with age has also been noted in myopic patients or nearsighted patients, indicating that age can lead to the shift in multiple structures in your eye, and it could cause other conditions other than astigmatism, such as myopia. So concluding, the field of astigmatism and its etiology is not definitive. And of course, there's so much we still have to learn, and there's so many gaps in the research, which sparks so much room to discover what exactly causes astigmatism in the first place. And what I find so interesting is that in my friend group, I'm pretty sure 50% of them have astigmatism, which is something we still need to explore, and how astigmatism could greatly affect the younger generations. However, some key takeaways that I learned, especially in the astigmatism field, is that genetics is a really promising link for finding a definitive origin to astigmatism. And this is due to the high prevalence we saw in genes such as PDGFRA and sonic hedgehog, and how that directly affects corneal curvature. But it's also important to note that environmental factors and age-related factors can be equally as affected to astigmatism. And ultimately, this suggests that we still need to learn a lot about the field. And an example could be me being born in August. I still don't know why I have astigmatism, but it could be because I was born in a perinatal photo period, because I don't have any other family members that have astigmatism. So there's so many unknowns to this that I just find super intriguing. And I'd like to thank my mentor, Brandon Lee, for guiding me throughout this research and I guess helping me explore more about astigmatism. And thank you. I'm open to any questions right now.
Thank you so much, Neha. Another very cool, personally, inspired project. I'm curious, throughout your research, did you learn anything about the different cures for astigmatism? Because obviously you were looking at the etiology, which is the causes of it. But I'm curious, aside from, I guess, contact lenses or glasses, what are some of the other, I guess, newer cures for something like astigmatism?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So as we know, it's established that contact lenses and glasses are the only correct mechanical corrective figures for astigmatism. But I think I've researched that there are certain therapies in which I don't know exactly what it's called, but you stare directly at an image that is distorted, and the more you stare at it, it's supposed to actually correct to how it'd be if you didn't have astigmatism. And I think that was something really cool and something that doesn't have much research around, but these are types of therapies that people use to correct their vision. And when it comes to the genetic side of things, I'm not 100% sure yet, but I think there's a lot of research being conducted on that.
Very cool. We have a couple other questions, one from Amanda. What were some setbacks you encountered throughout your research, such as how study findings on astigmatism contrasted based on geographic region, maybe?
That's a good question. So, one big setback I found is a lot of studies actually disproved multiple things that I saw in another study. So, like one study would say that, oh, PDGFRA is the reason that astigmatism, occurs. Another one would say that there's no significance with PDGFRA and astigmatism. And when it comes to graphical regions, I think there was a lot of um, studies around the whole perinatal photo periods, but it was like very, very vague to the point where it's just like, oh, there's just a significance and coincidence that people born in summer months have astigmatism. So as I mentioned before, it's very vast and there's a lot of research needed to be done.
Awesome. And then one last question from Clara. Do you think many people live undiagnosed with astigmatism and just pass it off as myopia?
Yes, I think that's something I actually read recently. Astigmatism could be mistook for myopia. There are actually different types of astigmatism, such as myopic astigmatism and hyperopic astigmatism. And you can even have astigmatism by having 20/20 vision because it has to do with the cornea. And everyone's astigmatism is different as it's like to a certain degree. So yeah, there are multiple cases in which people just, say it's myopia and then, get a prescription for that. So I think there are different ways to there are a lot of different ways to identify it, but it goes unnoticed multiple times.
Very interesting. And I guess one last question for me. I have a lot of friends who do like LASIK surgery, and is
Mhm.
LASIK something that can fix is astigmatism as well?
I think it is definitely an option, but it depends on the type of astigmatism again, as it has to do more with the cornea than the power that you have in your eye.
Mhm.
So I guess it really depends on the type because there's irregular astigmatism, there's irregular astigmatism, regular astigmatism, and like the different types with myopia and hyperopia. So it depends, I think, in the end.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Neha. I learned a lot.